to the Construction Big Breakfast, where we give you a hearty serving of insider tips and business strategies to help fuel your day so you can thrive in the construction industry. Now, here's your host.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Ben Pritchard, and welcome to the Construction Big Breakfast. Today, we'll be diving into all things digital, data, and standards around that. Joining me for today's podcast is our special guest, Dan Rossiter, who is the sector lead for the built environment at BSI. Welcome, Dan. It's great to have you on. Can you give our listeners and viewers out there a quick introduction to yourself, please?
Hi, Ben. Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So as Ben said, I'm Dan, and basically trained as an architectural technologist by trade. Spent a number of years in the industry doing public sector work, and I've now shifted into focusing originally around building information modeling, or BIM, and I've more now gone into kind of a dual wielding role where I do strategic stuff, talking to government key stakeholder sort of things for British standards, as well as sit on things like standards committees and participate in technical working groups with industry on various bits and pieces all around data, information, and that sort of stuff.
Cool, thanks. Before we get into it today, there's one important question that we ask all our guests, Dan, and that is, what did you have for breakfast? Or I guess today I can ask, big SD breakfast.
Oh, damn, Ben. This morning I had, it might seem childish in a way, I had a nice bowl of Cocoa Pops, and some biscuits with my tea. So a fairly light breakfast I tend to have anyway. So that was me. How about yourself?
Well, yeah, you've done better than I have. I've had 2 cups of coffee, but that's partly strategic. It is, although this will probably go out in a few weeks, so it isn't today, but it's Chinese New Year, and we're having a team lunch to celebrate Chinese New Year, so making extra special room for all the dumplings later. Right, so digital technology, BIM, digital twins, as we hear a lot of these days, which I knew would make you smile. We'll get onto that controversy later. The standards that sort of sit around it. So I've known you for a number of years, and you've championed all along the importance of it, how and why organisations should try and become digital first, make better use of their data, all of this things that I try my best to tell my clients about. What is it, I guess, that first attracted you into that side of the industry, and your time at BSI and BRE before that has all been around championing those standards and things like that. What attracted you to that part of the industry?
It's a good question. I think it's when I decided to come into the built environment, I think at the time what I loved was, I think, building science. And it was, I think the idea was almost understanding how stuff works is what I've always been interested in. And I think at the time, looking at things like architecture, engineering, that sort of thing. And what I found really was that happy middle ground, which was architectural technology. So I'm a member and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists, and what we champion is the technology of architecture. So actually, in my studies, it wasn't just about making buildings pretty. We did things on interstitial condensation. I could do U-value calculations. We did, structural force loadings and stuff, to a degree, so that what we were doing was buildable, and there was a sound kind of building science behind it. So then, when I started in practice, I was doing those sorts of things where I was quite chuffed. It never got built in the way, but I did detailing for a passive house high school at one point, so private school, and it went through PHPP, and it passed from my initial goes of doing it, because you're looking at the theory, applying the science, getting it done. And I think that's what drew me to BRE in a way, was that, from the outside looking in, they're basically in lab coats and hard hats. They're building scientists, which I thought was pretty chuffing cool, which kind of led me that way. And as it happened, they were looking for people who were focusing on all this BIM stuff. And at the time, I was doing loads on 21st century school stuff. I think in England, it's called Building Schools for the Future or something like that, the equivalent for your listeners. And then the idea was that, I was at the time then we were looking at a lot of way BIM should work in the office because it was going to become a requirement on some of the Welsh school things. So at that point, I started to double dive in, and so really it's about collaboration. It's about trying to express what you want and get it back, sort of thing. And it all made an awful lot of sense. And it wasn't really about the technology. It was about improving process. And I think that's where I latched onto, and then got involved with writing the training and doing the certification at BRE, which actually meant it was really good for learning, because I'd sit there and I'd teach it for a couple of days. I'd go off and then I'd actually audit a business, and then I'd sit there and teach again, and then I could be in the classroom and someone would go, yeah, but no one does that in the real world. And I can be sat there and going, yeah, well, I was with this small civils company yesterday and that's exactly how they do it. And they do it well, or they did this little tweak to make it work for them. And it meant that despite not doing it directly, I was exposed, to 50 companies a year in showing the way they were doing it, and while also then talking to people who are then either struggling or trying to understand the fundamentals, while also doing standard stuff. So I think the pull has always been that, digital seems to solve a lot of problems, and I'm sure you've seen the stuff from GIRI, the Get It Right initiative, and there's some really good data that comes out of them around errors in construction. And it comes down to things like poor communicated design information, poor communication between teams, and these sorts of things. And I think this is what digital and data can solve. I remember a project, say 10, 15 years ago, where what they were trying to do is use 3D models to tweak the sizes of a building to have less plasterboard offcuts.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing.
Was that the one up in the northeast? There was definitely one up there. I remember it in a CE Awards reading it. They were the standard size of a room to actually match the standard size of product to reduce waste. Something daft, isn't it? That you would think that there'd be some similarity in how you design something and what you're using. It's not as if car manufacturers are going to design something and they go, oh, those components, that engine won't fit, what do we do?
No, exactly. And and we've done things to brick dims for ages, but we haven't thought about the other stuff in that sort of way. And I think digital technology kind of gets you there, because you have access to data you didn't have before. And I can be flippant sometimes with some of this, and the example I give sometimes is that when you use digital tech, you have access to stuff that isn't cost effective to do normally. So you think of national highways, previously known as Highways England. In theory, they could pay someone to stand on every gantry and every bridge in the UK and physically count cars. That is possible. It's just not cost effective. Once you bring in, a camera that does number plate recognitions or something like that, you now have a cost effective access to that information, which allows you to make better decisions. And I think it's that mindset we need to push on to people, is that the more useful stuff you have, the better decisions that you can make about the work you're doing. And it doesn't matter if you're doing architectural design, if you're doing structural engineering, if you are a project manager on a construction site, you need good information to make good decisions.
Yeah, I mean, that highways one is a great example of really better understanding what outcomes you're trying to achieve, isn't it? It's not, having a guess about what the throughput of cars you're designing to. It is actually, well, no, I can accurately model what I'm looking for and design therefore. Same with throughput of people in a station, whether that's underground, overground, or whatever, all these things. And then you can start considering, because the other similar sort of example is the bank upgrade, where initially it was criticised for spending 1.5–2 million or something like that on travelators underground. What a waste of time. Yeah. But they actually could model the value created by getting people through in and out the station quicker, meant that it was actually sort of cost effective. And these are the type of conversations that you can't have without understanding and collecting and using the data properly. And you probably saw in BRE with smart waste and all that, those other stuff, you probably came across good examples, but also bad examples of people collecting data for the sake of collecting data to sort of tick boxes, as well as actually using it for good to gather insights and knowledge. And you've sort of touched on it a couple of times already, the whole sort of digital side of construction. There's more required in behavioral change than just technological adoption.
Well, yeah, and it's difficult because what's very easy to do is to go out there with a checkbook and buy the current fad piece of software. And to be fair to everyone, I won't name anyone, but it's very easy if you're a design company or a consultancy and you've seen someone do some really kind of sexy, exciting visuals in something and go, well, I want to spend $4,000 on a license for that. But immediately you start to think about, well, how does it actually fit into your business? And when I talk to companies about actual change and trying to become data-driven companies or to adopt kind of some form of digital transformation, the first thing I want them to actually look at is swim lane diagrams, to sit there and actually think, right, what is your core business? Can you map out the people you speak to and the key actions you take, and then show me how that piece of software or that piece of tech will actually help in that swim lane process to remove something or make it more efficient. And there's a presentation I did ages ago on the idea of how standards can do some of that. So when construction engineers do rebar design, they obviously produce rebar schedules and stuff as part of that. There is a British standard. I will say it is BS 8666 out of memory, but I'd have to check afterwards.
We all know that you're right, Dan. Don't play it down.
I'm 80% sure. What it is a standardized rebar schedule, basically. And as part of that, there is CAD CAM machines that are actually designed to take that as an input. So instead of you having to create a lovely drawing that has your own bespoke schedule on there, and then someone has to manually input everything into a machine to then spit it out, you've got the situation where the output of the design becomes the input for the fabrication. So that could potentially be eliminating a step if someone's having to manually type it in, because now you can feed it into the machine. And then that company could sit there and go, well, hang on, if we're sending our schedules to, Bars Limited to print them all out, why don't we just buy the machine ourselves, save ourselves on the overhead, and now we've become a design and fabrication company, while actually, not having to to pay someone else because we've got all the bits, we just need the piece of kit to do it. And then actually you're then starting to diversify your company and you become more productive for the sake of following a British standard. So I think that when you look at it from a process point where you go, right, what does my company do? How can this thing help us do what we do better? That's when you can bring in standards, tech, other organizations, wherever else, but from a process mindset.
And yeah, I mean, that's so important, isn't it? Just that understanding of what your processes are, where sort of technology can help, can make it better, whether that is removing waste or sort of removing steps, whatever it is. I mean, you sort of gave a good example of using standards well there. I mean, my early days in industry were in a sort of heavy regulated client. So I saw standards everywhere, and very much was told by all of the 40+ year people in the organization that they were a waste of time often. And I'm sure you see a lot of that, where people don't understand the true value of standards, and how they don't have to be, they're not gospel, they're guides. Often they're an understanding, they help you improve what you've got, give an idea of what a group of ultimately industry people who have come together to try and map out best practice, because it's not something that you on your own have come up with. There is always a group of industry people who come together for these, and I think one of the great examples of how standards can, when you understand it and help you out, is the talk you gave at DCW, the Thunderbirds one.
Oh yes,
It was just a really good example of just really simplifying how even sort of, you know, building this Blue Peter Tracy Island, you know, with standards just help you so much just to understand, apply, and do it in a productive manner.
Well, thank you. And don't worry, listeners, I'm not going to tell you to go buy some standards. But what I will say,
Or a Tracy Island kit, or I mean,
well,
I think that's all right.
I think in fact, yeah, go out and buy Tracy Island. I think hashtag not sponsored. Yeah, it's the the fun bit is that as you know, I bloody love standards, and it's more of what they try to achieve. And the interesting thing is that almost every standard, bar like a very small amount. When I say small amount, things like the IET wiring regs and Eurocodes, outside of that sort of sphere, standards are voluntary. And what I mean by that is that, you know, a client might cite them in their contract, or, you know, you might decide as a business that's what you're going to follow, but there is no law or piece of legislation that's telling you that you've got to follow that standard. And what they are voluntary packets of convenience. And, you know, what they do is they allow for people to actually just interoperate better. And, you know, there are loads of cheeky examples of this. And a very quick one I can actually see in front of me right now is my laptop, my mobile phone, and my Nintendo Switch, which isn't in front of me right now because I'm focusing on our podcast. They all use a USB Type-C power adapter. You know, there's a British standard that covers that.
No iPhone then.
Well, no, but that's the problem, isn't it? Is that, you know, you sit there and there's a standardized power charger. Note that, you know, just because there's many of them, there's no reason why you can't have 12 standard ones, because that's better than having 400 spoke ones. You know, but I'm now in the situation that, provided the voltage and the ampage, you know, and everything is all set clearly, actually I can use the same adapter in multiple devices. You know, we would have seen in the news, well, I say 6 months ago, but all time and date is a blur now, about conversations about food standards with America, and this idea of, you know, chlorinated chicken versus our food safety standards. So actually, if you use the same standard in two countries, it allows you to more easily trade goods. If you, as a construction company, use the same standards, and in this case, say ISO standards from that point of view, it's probably easier for you to actually bid to do work in other countries to collaborate with their project teams. You know, and we've got standards on the font on CAD drawings and the size of the fonts in there. There's ones on the symbols you use on drawings. You can tell if it's a door, if it's a window, or do windows open from the top or the bottom, sort of standard symbology stuff. There's things on BIM, as we know. There's stuff on retrofit. There's stuff on sustainability and key performance indicators. There's smart city, there's document management, there's data protection, there's cybersecurity. You know, almost any topic you can think of, there is standardized good practice relating to it. And some of the kind of industry heavyweights are the ones who sit on these committees to feed into it, and the public also feed into them as well. You know, we don't just publish these things, go, there you go. They go out for public consultation. And, you know, I've sat in many a meeting, which is like 3 days long, going through the feedback from the public to decide what happens. Now, the difficulty is that one person will say that thing needs to be twice as big, and then the next comment will be, no, it needs to be half as big.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to get something that works for everyone. And I think I did see this week that there's a consultation just open for, is it guidance rather than a standard around digital twins?
Yes. So the subtlety I put in there is that there's different types of standards, and guidance is a type of standard. Some of your listeners, if they are from the design side, might be familiar with BS 7000 Part 4, which is the guide for design management. So we have specifications, which is basically, you know, if you're going to follow it, do it as it says. There's code of practice, which is you should do it this way, and you've really got to tell someone if you tweak your way out of it. Then it goes down into guidance, which is kind of like, you know, this should be how it's done. So there are varying levels depending on what you're trying to talk about. And yeah, as very excitedly, we've got our digital twin concepts that have come out. And, you know, as a great example there, it's sponsored by the Centre for Digital Build Britain. It had a lot of the people who were involved in things like the Gemini principles and a lot of the information management framework and landscape work and stuff all feeding into that project, with Miranda Sharp doing technical authoring for it, who, you know, in a previous point was head of the Commons work stream for the National Digital Twin Programme. So we're not talking about, you know, Joe Wicks from down the street or someone. We're talking about a proper people being involved in trying to create this. And as you can see, it's now up for public comment. So it's now been developed into, this is what we think, you know, general guidance is. What is your reaction, public? So that then once you've reacted, we can then look at it to then refine it and actually create what we tend to call in BSI consensus. You know, at what point have we agreed that is what good practice is?
So we hoping off the back of this we'll have a general consensus on what a digital twin means, so that we can stop some of the nonsense that we often see on social media and the likes.
Yes, and that's part of it, because, you know, as you rightly say, you know, at the moment, you have some organizations who will tell you that, you know, a drone flying through to do some photo telemetry is a digital twin, and you'll have other companies that say no, it's, you know, it's IoT sensors built on a building management system, and, you know, those two aren't the same thing. But if we can get consensus on what are the 4 fundamental concepts that underpin a digital twin, then actually we can turn around and be like, well, actually, if that, you know, if that fly through was updated once every hour or something, if it had an appropriate synchronization rate or something, then maybe you know. But I don't want to say what is and isn't now, because I have strong views and I'll upset a lot of people.
I mean, that was the whole point of getting you on, Dan.
Oh, well, in which case I'll let rip. But so one of the examples, and this is why it gets so difficult, is personally, I don't think you can have a design digital twin. So, and the simple one for me is that digital twins in theory are meant to be a digital representation of something real with some form of synchronization to it, which could be through sensors or whatever. But if you've designed a school, what are you twinning? Because it doesn't exist. Physically, there is no school to twin. So, and at the same time, then when you do simulations where you might do, I know, pre-part L thermal simulations and stuff, people might say, well, there you go, there's a digital twin of the potential school. I'm like, well, no, you just run a simulation on a design.
It's a model. Until it's real, it's a model.
Well, yeah, and even then, you know, even at handover, you say, right, well, there's the real school, and I've got the as-built. I'm saying, well, that's a digital twin in the same way as a broken clock tells the time when it's at the right time of day, isn't it? Unless there's something that updates them, and you have confidence in that relationship between them, what you've really got is a coincidence that they both match at the point, really.
I mean, for me, I mean, so I'm with you. You know, it's a model until it's built, and then it's only, you know, a digital twin in the way it's often spoken about if you're actually collecting data that you then use to do something with. Otherwise, you can call it what you like, but it's pointless until you've got some sort of loop of constant improvement, or, you know, if you're improving what you have or what's coming next. For me, that is a key outcome in making it worthwhile, whatever you're going to call it.
Well, exactly. And I think I had a playful test somewhere, which was something like, if you had a digital twin of, say, a building, if I go in and open up all the windows, if you can then tell I've opened up the windows in the digital twin, then that's what you've got. Or vice versa, if I open the window in the digital twin, is there a little actuator that opens the window in the building? In which case, then, you know, there's a sensor actuator relationship, and then I can say, okay, cool, you've now got a digital replica of the building that but you know, but it's difficult, and I think this is where standards help.
You say it's difficult, but if we look at F1, you know, an F1 race will almost, you know, the amount of data they are constantly collecting so that they understand whether the front wing, rear wing needs adjusting, when the tires need changing, how much fuel do they use, what fuel mix. All this is being done live because of data being collected, putting into a digital model and a digital representation of the car, the climate, all of that, so that they know how to adjust performance for the race and the next race. So we're not trying to create something completely new, just trying to understand how some of those principles apply to construction.
I mean, but there are subtleties in there. So this is the edge of my knowledge now on this topic. So it's going to get wobbly. But as I understand, for things like tires in F1, as an example, what I've been led to believe is that those aren't they're not real sensors. They're something that's called virtual sensors, where effectively it's almost like machine learning style. They have evidence of what wear and tear should be, and then based on the performance and how long it spends, in turns or what speeds, it's estimating the wear and tear on the tire. It's not an actual assessment of the tire itself. And I think what's happening is they've had enough data collected that they can be fairly accurate with that I would turn around and say, well, that's actually not digital twinning at that point, because what you've done is you've forecasted, and it just means you have an accurate forecast, which then it goes into very grey, funny areas of, if you haven't actually got a sensor measuring it, can you really say it's a representation, or are you just making assumptions? Because if I could go online, find their sunrise sunset times, and I could make a digital twin of the sun, in theory, based on those without using any real sensors. But if someone blew it up, that simulation would keep going. In the same way that someone slashed that tire, say there was a controversial result in Formula One, depending on who, someone might go and sabotage a tire. The virtual sensor wouldn't pick that up.
No, you're right. The tires, I think, are one of the few things where there's a lot of simulation. You're right, compared to the air and the fuel and stuff like that. Which, again, this is me pushing my knowledge, but that is a lot more. Less modelling, more sensors, and a mix of both. But if you're really going to make the most use of the data you're collecting, there will always be a bit of a mix of both. I think it's not just about putting 1,000 sensors in. You need some sort of intelligence to model and simulate, and that's where machine learning, AI, and things like that can also sort of come in and overlay human input into creating well understood outcomes and insights.
Oh no, definitely, and I think it's simulations, predictions, and stuff will always have a place. It's just in my head and in the kind of the weird diagram I've got of where things fit together. A digital.
How do you collect the data?
Yeah, like I did, and it's a simulation might collect data into it, but it's not part of the digital. A digital twin feeds into a simulation. It's not part of, if that makes sense. But in theory, these sorts of standards like Flex 260 allows people to go in there and either say, no, Dan's right, there should be no simulations in there, and then it informs that, or people go, no, that's a load of rubbish, he's being too pedantic, it's about a digital, it's more digital rehearsal, and then actually, the narrative could go that way. But the point is, it's not about my view, and as a BSI employee, I have surprisingly little power over what goes into these things. It's about the collective view of what's considered good now, and these things always get updated and changed, so we evolve with good practice. And actually, if thinking changes, the standards change to reflect that thinking.
Two things that we've heard a lot over the years: Dan's right and Dan's pedantic. That is pretty much half an hour. So if I could carry on for another half an hour, but then I'll get told off. The podcast is too long. So on that note, we will call it a day. We'll wrap up the conversation. Dan, it's been a pleasure as always to catch up. If anybody wants to get to better know what standards are available for the built environment, how to map their journey, I guess, to becoming digital first, is the best route to look at the website, get in touch with you personally? How would someone go about that?
That's a very good question. So we have a built environment page on the BSI website, and I won't try and hedge spelling out the URL now. I'll give it to you, maybe to stick in the description for the podcast.
I was about to say it'll be in the description for the podcast. That's
fine. So I will provide that, and then if anyone always wants to reach out, they're more than welcome to grab me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and both of them it's Dan Rossiter 87, which I'm sure we can chuck some links in for that as well. But you're more than welcome to reach out. I always answer questions when they're sent through, and if you're looking for help, I'm happy to provide any advice I can.
No, and if you're interested in just following what's going on. Dan is a great person to follow on Twitter, although he does occasionally have questionable taste in TV, as this week has proven with tweets about the Masked Singer, but we'll definitely avoid that. Anyway, thank you all for watching and listening us this week. Hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Please remember to like, subscribe, share. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, please do get in touch with us. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much.
Want to learn more about how Invennt can help your business maximize its bottom line? Head on over to www.invennt.com and get in touch with our team today. Thanks for joining us this week on the Construction Big Breakfast. Make sure to visit our website, www.invennt.com, where you can subscribe to the Construction Big Breakfast on all platforms so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a positive rating. Or if you'd simply share it with a friend, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in for our next episode.